Modi was amongst the first foreign leaders to meet Trump in February. And at that stage, the feeling was
that he's our guy and we're going to do business together. When the whole thing backfired.
Did we read him right? I mean, here was a president who had this huge MAGA constituency to cater to, who was determined to leave his legacy, arguably the most powerful president in recent times.
And the whole American system at the end managed Trump won. But Trump too was a different beast.
On the face of it, it's bizarre invoking emergency powers on tariffs. But he's done so, and now the matter is going to go to the courts. And if I was a betting man, I'd put money that the court will take it off. They won't interfere with his exercise of emergency power.
You know, having invested, or some would say over-invested in the personal dimension, you've set great store by Donald Trump's return to the White House and imagined that things would happen in a very nice way. Is there a reluctance on our part, on the part of Modi, on the part of Jaishankar, to speak more sharp and more plain than what they've been doing? Be sharper, plainer, be more forthright. I mean, we saw at the UN General Assembly, for example, Donald Trump repeat his claim about having brought peace between India and Pakistan, right? And what struck me, in fact, when I saw him make that speech, I said, I fully hope and I expect that the Indian side will exercise their right of reply.
The same point had struck me when Trump had made these claims from in his UNGA speech, whether we will exercise the right of reply. And obviously we didn't. I haven't seen till now that the official spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs has said that, look, this is wrong. There is no chance of a nuclear exchange. I wouldn't like to be in Jaishankar's shoes at this stage.
Hello and welcome to The Wire. I'm Siddharth Varadarajan. What is the role of an individual leader when it comes to diplomacy today? I ask this question because both in the United States and in India, we have leaders who have made much of their own individual role, their own individual connection, their own individual so-called friendships with other world leaders. And the question that we need to ask is, to what extent have these personal connections, whether true or imaginary, had an actual positive or concrete impact on the foreign policy and the national interests of their respective countries? And joining me today to discuss this topic is Ambassador Vivek Katju, retired from the Indian Foreign Service and the Ministry of External Affairs, prolific columnist. And I have to say that your last column, or one of your recent columns, which the Telegraph ran with the headline "-1 approach," but which essentially carried the tagline, "Personal ties need not lead to diplomatic gain," is something that struck me as eminently worthy of discussion. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about, because we've seen over the last, I would say, 6 to 8 months, some kind of a shock settling in on the Indian establishment, Indian foreign policy establishment, which had imagined that Prime Minister Modi's supposed one-to-one equation with Donald Trump was going to lead to a smooth relationship between the two countries. And we've seen, despite this professed friendship, India and the US relationship today seems to be on skid row. Did we make too much of the personal factor? Has the Indian establishment today made too much of the personal factor in diplomacy?
Siddharth, I've always believed that it is good for diplomacy, whether multilateral or bilateral, especially the latter, bilateral, if there is a smooth relationship between the heads of government. That facilitates the process, the diplomatic process. But at the end of the day, it has been my experience that national interests and how they are perceived by a country determine interstate relations, determine approaches to multilateral issues, and let us not forget that leaders, however strong they may be, head establishments. They head certain or represent certain constituencies in their respective countries, and therefore they have to keep an eye on what the establishments or their constituencies are saying. Hence, there can be a feeling of friendship. Leaders can like each other, leaders may feel comfortable with each other, and that naturally is an advantage. But does that translate into an upward movement in bilateral ties or in a resolution of multilateral issues? To my mind, is a question mark. And my experience has been that if it plays a role, it is not such an overpowering role that it can mask the national interest.
But let's try to trace out or delineate the backstory to the current US-India impasse. And I would say there are two aspects that are of particular interest. One is the India-US standoff on the question of trade, but which also intersects with India's relations with Russia. So there is an element of the US as a great power having difficulty with some choices and alignments that India chooses to make, besides the question of trade. And the second issue which has come to the fore of the sudden, shall we say, renewed vigor in the relationship between Islamabad and Washington. Going back to the US presidential election in 2024, the clear perception that I had during the campaign and in the run-up to the campaign, perhaps you picked up the same thing, was that the Indian establishment openly favored Trump getting elected. Do you think that, and this goes back to Trump's first term, that famous Ab Ki Baar Trump Sarkar, Modi's supposed endorsement of Trump. Do you think that he and his advisors made an error in making a choice in favor of one person over the other?
I think, as a rule of thumb, it's always better to steer clear of the domestic choices that another country's people make in democratic elections. It is better to deal with the government in power. I think there are no exaggerated expectations there. And it's on the basis of cold realism. I, for one, have always favored such an approach. And I think the test of time also shows that. Now, it's not easy because the leaders are also human beings. They have their likes, their dislikes, their preferences, and they color this. I recollect once that I was secretary and the then Prime Minister, the late Prime Minister, gave instructions to me that there was a visiting head from a European country. The instructions were to see if we can do something substantive in that relationship. And the more I examined it, the more I talked to different members of our government, our companies, public sector companies, etc., the more I realized that the opportunities for bilateral cooperation were limited. So I knew that there was a degree of fellowship between them, but I was constrained in a meeting to point out that there was very little we could do to promote a substantial bilateral relationship. We'll move in that direction, but it can't be overnight, and things aren't very rosy. And I must say, the then Prime Minister accepted it. So there are these preferences, etc. I dare say it will be with everyone. I'm not pointing a finger, but I'm saying that this is a natural process. The question is, how much of an emphasis does the establishment around a leader places on that a personal relationship between the leader and another leader? I feel that it's always prudent on the part of the establishment to try to rein in exuberance on this score, and to always attempt to ensure that the leader is grounded. And believe me, leaders are very grounded. All political leaders are grounded. And they can be, they're very sharp in perceiving where interest lies. So very often those who are around them try to second guess or and that is what should be avoided.
You know, I remember back in 2005, 2006, when India was negotiating the nuclear deal with the United States. And there were two occasions when the delegation level talks on the fine print of what the two sides were going to agree hit an impasse. Both in July 25 when Manmohan Singh was in Washington, and then in, I think, end of Jan 2006 when George W. Bush was in Delhi, and they were trying to settle the separation plan. And on both occasions, the two delegations were deadlocked. And at that point, this is what I learned as a reporter, that the Indian officials then spoke to the Prime Minister and said, look, you now have to pick up the phone and talk to George W. Bush and work. And so apparently Manmohan was then the person who prevailed on Bush and said, look, this has to happen. And then a way forward was found. So it's not unusual for leaders to rely on a personal connect to push the system a little bit further ahead. In the case of Trump and Modi, however, or in the case of the Chinese and India, in fact, your piece talks about, you quote Modi referring to the +1 approach being his own personal equation between the two leaders and so on. This doesn't seem to have delivered when the chips are down.
Let's take the first instance that you mentioned, Dr. Manmohan Singh picking up the phone and talking to Bush. Obviously, if there is a degree of comfort between them, then that conversation becomes easier. And naturally, as a leader talking to another leader, he would have realized that what he is trying to prevail upon Trump is to show that it is in mutual interest to follow the paths that Dr. Singh was suggesting. That it is not on the basis of friendship, that please do this for me because you are my friend, but because it's in our mutual interest. Again, when it comes to, say, China, there was obviously a period of bonhomie between the Prime Minister and President Xi. But I don't see that bonhomie can prevail over national interest. It can facilitate an understanding of national interest. It can facilitate a process, but it can't do more. That is my understanding. Similarly with Trump. Trump is very shrewd. He says that Prime Minister Modi is my friend. Yesterday at Sharm el-Sheikh, he said the same thing, that India is a great country and they have a great leader.
But do you think these repeated statements by Trump, the sort of attempts at flattery, the other day I saw with his ambassador designate, he sent a framed photograph of Modi and Trump at their joint press conference in Washington, a signed photograph. I mean, do you think that these attempts at flattery have an impact? I mean, does it serve, and maybe that's the purpose, does it serve to hold India and the Prime Minister back then in terms of, you are then more guarded in how you respond, what you say?
Look, I told you earlier in this conversation that leaders are also human beings.
Right.
All leaders, I mean, they are made of the same clay as all of us are. So obviously, there can be these attempts, but it's my experience that no one can reach the top in a political system, especially in a country like the United States or India, unless he's very hard-boiled. And therefore, he's able to see through all this. He may factor it in and keep it at the back of his mind, but when it comes to his interests, he realizes his limitations. Now, let's take the present case of trade you mentioned. Clearly, it seems to me, I'm not privy to any inside knowledge. From what I read in the newspapers, it seems to me that one of India's red lines is agriculture and dairy. It seems also to me that Trump wants an ingress in these areas. And I don't think that personal friendships can overcome these red lines.
Which are politically determined within India's domestic politics.
They're determined with your economic interests.
I mean, the farmers staged their protests for 2 years against those 3 laws. And
I mean, yes, of course, the protests are important. But apart from protests, there's also the fact, which stares us in our face, that 50% of our people are involved in agriculture and it contributes just around 15% of the GDP. Now, which brings me to this point, which I've written about, that in the past, our narratives used to be that we're making great progress, but that there are certain areas where there are gaps, where we cannot open up. But over the last few years, the narrative has been that we are now the 5th largest economy, we'll be the 4th largest, we'll then be, by the end of the decade, we'll be the third largest. There is concomitantly no reference to the gaps. Now, that enables foreign interlocutors to focus only on the pluses. And it puts you on the back foot when you then start negotiating and say, look, I have these difficulties. If the interlocutor had these difficulties in the back of his mind earlier, then he would not make exaggerated demands of you. So I think this is one aspect too that we've got to look at.
Having invested, or some would say over-invested in the personal dimension, you've set great store by Donald Trump's return to the White House and imagined that things would happen in a very nice way. Is there a reluctance on our part, on the part of Modi, on the part of Jaishankar, to speak more sharp and more plain than what they've been doing? Be sharper, plainer, be more forthright. I mean, we saw at the UN General Assembly, for example, Donald Trump repeat his claim about having brought peace between India and Pakistan, right? And what struck me, in fact, when I saw him make that speech, I said, I fully hope and I expect that the Indian side will exercise their right of reply. Because here you have somebody making an outrageous claim, just as the Pakistanis have done in the past. And India has always exercised its right, but we've kept completely silent on that. And and in the face of multiple claims by Trump, you compare that with the plain speaking by the Brazil president, for example, which in a way kind of compelled. I mean, despite President Lula speaking pretty plainly, pretty bluntly, you had a situation where this contrived encounter, which you speak about in your article, at the General Assembly Hall, leads to Trump saying, like, he's a good guy, I'm going to meet him. I mean, things may not work out, but at least the Brazilians are putting their cards on the table in a plainer way than we have. Do you think the friendship that Modi believes he has with Trump is coming in the way of that?
The same point had struck me when Trump had made these claims from in his UNGA speech, whether we will exercise the right of reply. And obviously we didn't. Why go further? Yesterday, I think in Sharm el-Sheikh, what Shehbaz Sharif said is something which is extraordinary. I don't know if you've seen his full speech.
I just saw the clips.
Oh, I would urge you to see it. It's an amazing exercise. He's extolled Trump. He said that we nominated him. And this is, mind you, it's one case nominating him to the UN, to the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. It's quite another thing to say this in front of other heads of state and government of significant countries. And he said, you are the greatest peacemaker and we are going to re-nominate you, etc. And then he went on to say that you saved the life of millions in South Asia. So the question that I'm asking is, and I haven't seen it, it well might have happened as we are speaking, but I haven't seen till now, as I said, it might have happened, but I haven't seen till now that the official spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs has said that, look, this is wrong. There was no chance of a nuclear exchange, and that what was eventually panned out between India and Pakistan was bilateral. It was extraordinary. The Sharif said this in that gathering. So I think today the Indian foreign policy establishment, if they haven't done so already, would be grappling with this. So you're right. If you develop a kind of a rapport, then management becomes a little more difficult. It is not it's not so sort of cold and so forthright as it can be without that feeling of quote unquote friendship and that you're letting the other man down. But it's also a question of management. I mean, how do you manage it? I wouldn't like to be in Jaishankar's shoes at this stage.
No, but the reason I mention it is that there's something to be said for laying down firm like, look at the way the Chinese handled Trump's initial round of tariffs, or the way Brazil responded. And coming back to the Manmohan nuclear example, I think there was the reason George W. Bush responded to Manmohan was not so much because there was a personal equation or personal respect. There may have been that, right? But somewhere down the line, Manmohan Singh was able to convey to the Americans that, look, this deal which you want, and you want this deal for geopolitical reasons, we are on the verge of walking away. And he was able to convey that sense of the inviolability of Indian red lines, that this is going to completely undo everything that you have been working on for the last 20 years. And I think in July 2005, the separation plan, and even a couple of instances later when the US tried to rework the nuclear deal, officials tried to rework it. And finally, Manmohan Singh ji made a speech in Parliament where he basically went public with what India was going to never accept. And that had the desired impact. So somewhere down the line, I feel, the two are, very different. Trump is not Bush, Modi is not Manmohan. But there is something to be said for laying down your red lines in a transparent way so that the other side knows. And then no longer waste time pushing you and trying to negotiate the impossible and then reckons that they have to come up with some other alternative.
I think to be fair to Modi, in his own way, he had said so publicly what our red lines are. So on trade, he said, I'll never let the farmers down, etc. And it's for the Americans to pick this up, these signals up. The problem is that Trump is a very persistent guy. He has said it around 40 times.
Yeah.
So, what do? Do you keep repeating it, or you say it once and you hold firm? So it's again, as I said, a question of management. But here, it is here that I really think that it becomes easier to convey signals forthrightly if there isn't this thing that this man is my friend and you have this overlay of friendship. But that's Trump uses the word very loosely. He'll say you are my friend and then to harm your country, he'll take every step.
Or the H1Bs or everything.
Everything he'll take steps that he needs to take, and he'll say that tough.
Yeah.
So to put it crudely, कि भाई दोस्ती अपनी जगह, धंधा अपनी जगह.
So he's able to finesse that much better than our chaps are able to do.
You see, because our chaps are at the receiving end. You draw a comparison with Brazil. I think the Americans have a trade surplus. Or rather, I think the Brazilians are in a better position on trade with the Americans than we are. You have labor-intensive industries which are dependent on the American market, and you have difficulties there. H1B again is a big thing for you. Similarly, on critical technologies, you are dependent on it. I think where we went wrong, quite frankly, is perhaps not understanding, and this is where maybe one day Jaishankar will let us know, because it's his brief quite clearly. It's the Foreign Office's brief, and he's both a professional, he's been a professional diplomat, and he's the political head of the Foreign Office now. Whether we read Trump 2 right, whether we read that Trump 2 is a different person or different animal from Trump 1. You see, in Trump 1, we'd been able to manage him. Yeah. But Trump 2, the Prime Minister went there. And
the whole American system at the end managed Trump 1. But Trump 2 is a different beast.
Trump 2 is a different kettle of fish. And Modi was amongst the first foreign leaders to meet Trump in February. And at that stage, the feeling was, or the projection of the Indian establishment was, that sab changa hai.
That he's our guy and we're going to do business together. But the whole thing backfired.
But then clearly, clearly it was not so. So that is why there is this question in my mind that did we read him right? Did we realize that Trump 2, the objective factors in America are different? Here was a president who had this huge MAGA constituency to cater to, who was determined to leave his legacy, who was arguably the most powerful president in recent times. Politically, he has, not only did he get the Electoral College, he also had a majority of the vote. He is master, at least for the next, until the next round of congressional elections, he is the master of the Congress. And I dare say no Republican is in a position to challenge him at the moment. And in the Supreme Court, he has a 6-3 majority. So, on the face of it, it's bizarre invoking emergency powers on tariffs. But he's done so, and now the matter is going to go to the courts. And if I was a betting man, I'd put money that the court will take it off. They won't interfere with his exercise of emergency powers. So, did we realize that we are dealing with a different man in a different setting, a far more ruthless person, because he'd gone through what he feels was grave injustice, not caused by us, but his own system, but that he'll take it out to put his stamp on the world. He'll take it out in different ways, and if his friends are targets, then so be it.
I think the answer to your question is that, of course, we didn't read him right, but the obvious follow-up, or perhaps an even greater sin, and I want to put this to you as my last question and last set of things we want to talk about, that did we err? Did we fail to anticipate when Jaishankar picked up the phone to speak to Rubio, when Sindoor had started, to draw American officers in, to get the Americans involved in communication with the Pakistan, however you want to put it. Did we fail to anticipate that in Trump too, given his obsession, he had already made clear his obsession about settling Ukraine and so on, should we have anticipated that drawing him in at this juncture would have all kinds of adverse consequences? And I don't mean just the political optics of the claim that Trump has made, that I did this, I did that, and I brought peace between India and Pakistan, but the fact that it has allowed the Pakistani establishment. Of course, there are other longer term, objective reasons why Islamabad and Washington have come together, but no doubt the post-Sindoor scenario has hugely facilitated that. Did we make a mistake?
I think you'll have to give me a couple of minutes.
Of course.
First, you don't need to draw them in. The major powers, especially the United States, would get drawn in if there are armed hostilities between two nuclear weapon states. It's a given.
But suo motu is one thing. When you pick up the phone and call him up, that's another, right?
I haven't heard that. Your sources are better, but I really don't think it matters. They would come in nevertheless. That is point one. Point two, if you recollect, after Pulwama, when this boy, when Wing Commander Abhinandan was there, then I think Trump was somewhere in the Far East. And
in Korea, I think.
Yeah, and he said, you'll be hearing good news there, good news soon. And thereafter, all the things. So they were involved then too. I think what has happened this time is how all this unfolded. If you look at it, on the first day, I think our Air Force did well. The government has, the Air Force or the CDS has himself said that there were some setbacks. They haven't given sort of details of those setbacks, but he said there were setbacks. But in 2 days' time, we were able to work it out, and I think the Air Force's performance on the 10th was remarkable. I personally think that on the 10th, they demonstrated the ability to hit any target, anywhere in Pakistan, and they had been able to overcome Pakistani air defenses, etc. The question before us is, how far have we been able to sail these facts? Because these are facts. Yeah. I know we sent out teams outside, etc., but those teams were more in the context of Pahalgam, the terrorist attacks, etc., the necessity of Op Sindoor. But I think now we need to find ways to ensure that our messaging is believed, because it's true.
But in a way, that's a second order issue, right? I mean, how successful was Sindoor, etc. But I'm talking about the US-Pak relationship.
No, that's what I'm coming to. Now, quite clearly, the Parks were able to convince Trump and the Americans that things were getting out of hand. And that unless they leaned on India on the 10th to agree to a ceasefire or cessation of hostilities, things might become difficult. Whether they would have is a separate issue. And then there was a choreography that was done. And we are right. Factually, we are absolutely right when we say that the Pak DGMO contacted our DGMO and then things followed. So it's true to say that ultimately it was done bilaterally.
But
in Trump's mind, and that is being fed by the Pakistanis, as was seen yesterday in Shehbaz Sharif's panegyric to him, this ode, I mean, it's a remarkable. Those 5 minutes of Shehbaz Sharif are absolutely remarkable. I've seldom heard, perhaps never heard anything like that. In Trump's mind, he's convinced him that, look, you are the guy who saved millions of lives. Now, how do you get that out? If that's become an idea fixie in his mind, then it's become an idea fixie. Do you have the capacity to literally now persuade some of the people around Trump to be able to convey to him that, look, what the Indians are saying is right? That by ultimately they showed restraint, etc. Or whether the American system is much too scared of Trump. No one wants to try to say something contrary to him if he is repeated it 40 times is a different thing. So I feel that two things at the end. One, that in any armed conflict, we've got to be aware that the major powers would step in. But with Pakistan, the major powers would step in. And we have to prepare ourselves to handle how we handle them in such a situation. Two, I think we've got to find a way of really dealing with Trump. How we'll do it? At one stage, and I've written about this, could we have found words? We're very good at words. To assuage him in the initial aftermath of Op Sindhur. Pause. Even now, can we find words?
or will those words egg him on in a way?
That is the real danger. No, that is the real danger, because we can't be oblivious of, and let me conclude with that, we can't be oblivious of what is the holy grail for any American president or Western leader when it comes to India and its relations with its Western neighbor.
Exactly. On that note, Ambassador Katju, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much for watching The Wire. If you are a regular viewer of our YouTube channel or a reader of The Wire, you know that we are non-profit media. And non-profit media means that we rely on our viewers for financial support. So do please consider making a donation to The Wire, because every paisa, every rupee counts. The more generous you are, the more work we are able to do in the public interest. Thank you so much.